Friend exploited my hospitality by insisting on using my home for her child's party, only to uninvite me once I set boundaries. I have this friend who wanted to celebrate her child's birthday in my party room because, as she put it was a special number her kid was turning. When I asked why she couldn't just have it at her own place, she told me bluntly that my home was more kid-friendly. I wasn't crazy about this idea to begin with, so I suggested she look at other options, like a community center or some other public venue. A few weeks later, she came back to me saying those venues were either way too expensive or too far away and, again, asked if she could use my place for the party. By hosting it at my home, she would be saving hundreds of dollars on the venue cost. Reluctantly, I agreed, but I had to make some conditions crystal clear. There would be a maximum number of people, we'd stick to the booking time, and she'd have to pick up her own guests from the lobby. I needed to spell this out for her because the last time my partner and I hosted a huge party for her, we ended up doing more work than having fun. There were way too many people, and we spent the whole time running back and forth to the lobby to retrieve guests who showed up late, setting up decorations, coordinating games, and doing most of the cleanup afterwards. We didn't get to enjoy our own party. So this time, I wanted her to take on some of that responsibility and treat us more as guests, not just her unpaid event coordinators. As the date approached, 2 weeks before her child's birthday party, she told me she wanted to move the party an hour later because her child's nap schedule had changed. Not only that, she had already invited more people than my agreed maximum and said it would be too awkward to uninvite them. Of course, all the grandparents had to come too. I stood my ground and told her I wouldn't be canceling the booking, and asked if we could stick to the original time. That's when she told me to just cancel the party, claiming I seemed too stressed out. Truthfully, I was prepared to work with her, but she refused to compromise. And, as always, she only offered to cover the cost of the room booking, the fee my strata charges. She made no offer to compensate for my time or efforts, just like at the last big party we hosted for her. Later, I found out through social media that she went ahead and had a birthday party for her child anyway, but neither my partner nor I were invited. That stung. It felt like she only wanted us to be a part of her celebrations if we provided the venue and handled the arrangements. Living in a luxury condo near the city center with lots of amenities seems to make some people think they can take advantage of it. I've started feeling like she treats my home like it's her personal community center, a place to impress her friends, not to spend time with me or value my friendship. Even earlier this year, she'd asked if she could use my party room for her own birthday but ultimately decided against it because she didn't want the hassle of cleaning up at the end of the night. This entire ordeal has made me reassess our friendship. I've been really upset about it since I saw the party pictures on social media. We've been friends for almost a decade, college together, vacations, housewarmings, wedding dress shopping, working at the same jobs, me visiting her in the hospital after she gave birth. I was there through a lot of tough times for her leading up to these big favors she began asking. I always felt like I'd be a bad friend if I said no, knowing the hardship she'd faced. But now, looking back, I feel incredibly used. I don't feel appreciated, just exploited. As far as I'm concerned, I'm going to downgrade her to an acquaintance, or maybe even just a coworker. Over the last year alone, my partner and I have given over $600 in cash gifts for her child's milestone celebrations, on top of all the hosting. It feels like a slap in the face that we didn't even get an invitation to this latest party. After that first big party we hosted for her, she and her husband said they'd treat us to dinner as a thank you. It's been over a year they've never offered. Even when we go out to eat together, the bill is always split down the middle. They had opportunities to show their gratitude, but they didn't take them. In fact, I'd already bought a birthday gift for her child, and now I don't even know what to do with it because the return period has expired. Honestly, I was astonished when she asked again if she could use our place for another party after everything we did the first time: 6 hours of setting up, decorating, preparing food, coordinating games, cleaning up. The party itself really only lasted about 2 hours for her guests, who came and went as they pleased, while we did all the work. You'd think if someone hosts a big party for you, you wouldn't ask for that kind of favor again, or at least, you'd insist on compensating them for the time and stress it takes to host these events. I still remember, after that first party, finding smeared cupcake icing on my couches because she wasn't watching the children she'd invited. What's important for me to clarify is that I never volunteered my place for any of these parties each time. She was the one to ask. When she approached me to use my party room for her kids' party again, I explained that the previous party had been a lot of work and why I needed her to take on more responsibility this time. I set firm boundaries. She needed to play a more active role and make sure her guests weren't my problem. At her last party, Neither she nor her husband bothered to retrieve guests themselves. We spent hours making small talk with strangers in the elevator and escorting people. I told her all this. She paid lip service to understanding, claiming she'd once hosted a party for a friend, but it was nowhere near the same scale. Half the people, barely any decorations, minimal food. After all this, I finally realized I need to put my foot down and value my own peace. Update 1. I was expecting her to acknowledge my feelings and apologize. Instead, she replied that she was a little offended by my message, claiming she was the one inconvenienced since she had to cancel her party at my place last minute. Apparently, it was so awkward for her to tell everyone the party wasn't happening on the original date because she couldn't book her own party room on that day. That's right, she actually had access to her own party room in her building the entire time. But she still wanted mine, since it's supposedly more kid-friendly. She complained about having to book her party on a different day, and when I pressed her about not inviting my partner and me, she said she just assumed I'd be working on the new date. That sent me over the edge. I told her I had the day off. I was absolutely livid at this point, so I laid it all out, the way she'd been acting entitled since I moved into my current place over a year ago, constantly trying to invite herself and her family over just to take advantage of my condo's amenities. I reminded her of how I hosted her huge party last year and took initiative on a bunch of things when her other friends didn't step up, even going out of my way to be supportive when she was going through personal hardship. I never asked for anything in return, I just wanted to be a good friend. But it's been one thing after another, always asking for more, pushing for me to host not just her birthday but her child's party too, while never once offering to do anything similar for me. I told her how inconsiderate it was for her to make so many demands, especially after I already did so much for her. I pointed out that she should be ashamed to use her friend this way and urged her to imagine being in my shoes for once. I was clear that the whole mess with the party room booking was her fault in the first place, all because, for one single day, she couldn't be bothered to wake her child up from a nap, never mind the time and plans of everyone she'd invited. I told her I was surprised though, honestly, not that surprised that she had taken no responsibility and hadn't apologized. Eventually, she sent a short message saying she was sorry and hadn't realized how much trouble she'd caused, and then asked if we could just move past this. That was it. Out of self-respect, I told her I didn't want to be friends anymore. She left me on read. Just to clarify, even though it definitely didn't feel fair, I didn't run a business or profit off her. She kept asking me to book the room at cost, and the money went straight to my strata. In fact, I lost money. Like, during the last party I hosted for her, my partner ended up spending over $50 at the local party store on helium balloons for the decorative display she wanted. Sure, she covered the party supplies, but I was expected to offer up my home and be present for the entire event from setup to clean up and coordinate everything, since we actually live in the condo and don't want to risk fines or damages caused by guests we barely know. In the end, I had to draw the line. I've never looked back. Update 2. I thought that was the end of it after I told her I didn't want to be friends anymore. It wasn't. Last Saturday, right as I was heading out for brunch, concierge called me asking if I was hosting a children's party in the party room and whether I was on my way down. I wasn't. He said there were already people waiting in the lobby with balloons and a cake, and a face painter had shown up early asking for loading dock access. They were telling him they were with me. I went downstairs and there she was in the lobby with her parents, her in-laws, and a handful of parents and kids, most of whom I didn't recognize, looking irritated and confused. She acted like I'd kept her waiting for an appointment I'd agreed to. She launched into this speech about how she couldn't make the timing work with her own building and everyone had already planned for today, so she'd decided it would be easier to use mine like we originally discussed. Apparently her plan was to have the guests meet in the lobby and then call me so I could come down and just let them in. I told her, very calmly and in front of concierge, that I had not booked anything, she was not my guest, and she would not be using my home or my building's amenities. She tried to argue that I'd already said yes in principle, which is not a thing. When that didn't work, she pivoted to guilt. It's just kids, it's 2 hours, you won't even notice. Meanwhile, a balloon arch company showed up dragging a metal frame and asked where to set up, and an entertainer with a bag of glitter and temporary tattoos wandered in, equally confused. Concierge told her without a resident booking on file and the host present, no one was going anywhere, and if they attempted to tailgate past security doors they'd be trespassing. That's when she raised her voice and accused me of humiliating her in front of her family. I reminded her, again in front of staff, that we were not friends, she was not invited, and she needed to leave. The grandparents stared at the floor, the kids were whisper crying, and I felt sick to my stomach that it had even come to this. She finally left after concierge asked if he needed to call the building manager. As she was heading out she turned around and said, "You know what, Just forget we ever knew each other. I said, that's already done, and went back upstairs shaking. Within an hour she texted me a long paragraph about how I'd sabotaged her child's special day and how any decent person would have let them use a room that was just sitting there. She said I owed her further deposits for the vendors she couldn't cancel on and the embarrassment she endured. I responded that any loss was on her for trying to plan a party in a building she doesn't live in without permission and showing up uninvited after being explicitly told no. I told her not to contact me again. I wish it stopped there. Monday morning, her name popped up on my calendar for a same-day HR meeting. She had filed a complaint alleging I'd created a hostile environment and retaliated against her by publicly denying her and spreading details of her personal life at work. HR asked me to explain. I brought printouts of our messages, the building email confirming there was no booking, and a statement from concierge that she'd arrived without authorization and tried to enter using my name. HR concluded it was a personal matter outside of work and reminded both of us not to engage with each other at the office. She asked to move to a different pod, which I supported. Later that day a colleague I trust pulled me aside and said she'd been telling people for months that I rent out my party room and that I canceled last minute to be spiteful. I sent an email to building management that afternoon asking them to put a note on my file that no event bookings can be made or amended without a signed form and a copy of my ID, and that no one is to be let up under my name unless I'm physically present. They agreed and flagged her name as well. 2 days after the HR meeting, her husband texted me from an unknown number demanding $275 for the face painter and the balloon arch, threatening small claims if I didn't make it right. I told him to proceed however he saw fit and that I would welcome the opportunity to show a judge's wife messages where she tries to use my building without permission. He sent one more message accusing me of jealousy, which I didn't respond to, and then I blocked him. The next weird twist came from a mutual friend I hadn't planned to involve anyone, but she asked me point blank over lunch why I'd moved the party and then not shown up. That's how I found out what she'd been telling people. I showed our friend the message where I ended the friendship and the date. Our friend saw it and told me that the day they turned up at my building, her own party room was open. It had actually been available all along for that day and the one she ended up choosing. She just preferred mine because the photos come out better and she thought she could make it work if I showed up confident. She told her in-laws earlier that week that she had it covered with a friend's space downtown. I don't know why hearing the details stunned the way it did, but it made a lot of other things click into place. It was never just about convenience. I dropped off the unopened gift at a local family shelter that afternoon. The volunteer at the desk asked if I wanted to write a note to go with it. I wrote, "Happy birthday. I hope this makes you smile," and left it at that. I went home, told concierge to deny entry to anyone who says they are with me unless I'm standing next to them, and unlinked her number from the building's intercom in case she tried to buzz herself up using my unit again. My phone has been blessedly quiet. I'm not pretending this hasn't been messy or that I feel heroic. I felt absolutely awful watching a child's party dissolve in the lobby because an adult couldn't hear the word no. But I didn't cause that, I just finally stopped cushioning her from the consequences of taking advantage. Work is calmer now that we're not sitting near each other, my weekends are actually mine again, and my home finally feels like my home and not a prop. I meant it when I said I'd drawn the line. I'm keeping it there. Update 3. I spent a night printing everything. The text where I ended the friendship. The building email confirming there was no booking. The concierge's incident report. The HR summary saying it was a personal dispute. I added screenshots where she wrote in principle like it was a legal term. It felt ridiculous and also, somehow, like exactly what she would do. Small claims court was fluorescent lights, a line of people holding manila folders, and a judge who had absolutely no patience for theatrics. She came in with her husband and a 3-ring binder that had cover sheet labeled party agreement. She had printed out a photo of my party room from my building's website and slid it toward the judge like it proved jurisdiction. When it was her turn she launched into the same speech about how I'd offered my place and then embarrassed her. The judge stopped her 2 minutes in and asked for a contract or a booking confirmation. She flipped through plastic sleeves. There wasn't one. The judge asked again what did the defendant agree to, in writing, on what date, for what consideration? She said yes in principle. The judge blinked. That's not a contract. That's not anything. My turn lasted 5 minutes. I handed over our messages. I handed over the building email and the incident report. I pointed to the date I told her not to contact me again. The judge read silently for a long 30 seconds with her mouth a straight line. She asked the concierge his name and squinted at the letterhead, then turned back to my ex-friend and asked why she went to a private building without a resident, without a booking, after being told no. She tried to pivot to the child. The judge held up a hand. This is a court, Not a sympathy contest. You cannot force someone to host you, and you cannot invent agreements. Case dismissed. No damages, no anything. The judge actually looked at me and said, if she contacts you again about this, you can seek a restraining order. Then, to her, if you file something like this again without evidence, you risk sanctions. We all stood there for a beat in the kind of silence that buzzes. On the way out, her husband muttered unbelievable under his breath at me. I kept walking. I thought that would finally be it. It wasn't at least for 24 or more hours. A balloon company DM'd me on Instagram that evening saying they'd been contacted by a client to give a statement that she'd been misled by a venue host. They wanted to know if I had in fact canceled on the day. I sent them the court dismissal stamp that morning and told them I wasn't a venue host, I was a resident who said no. They replied with a single "oh" and, a minute later, "we're sorry you were dragged into this." The face painter emailed me separately to say she'd been asked to come to court and declined, and that she'd eventually gotten pay after she told them she wouldn't show up without full payment in advance next time. I sat on my couch and felt that weird combination of relief and disgust you get when a mess starts to unravel and you realize just how many people were looped into it without your consent. Building management sent a community-wide notice on Monday. Effective immediately, hosts must present ID in person to pick up party room keys, be it on site for the entire event, and personally escort vendors. No exceptions. A refundable damage deposit would now be taken on a credit card in the resident's name. The email didn't name names, but the timing wasn't subtle. The property manager called me and asked if I'd be willing to join a resident committee to review amenity policies from the point of view of someone who's seen what can go wrong. I said yes. If I'd already been turned into the villain in someone else's story, I might as well be useful. 2 days after the policy went out, concierge rang me while I was mid-Netflix asking if I was expecting a delivery from a woman with a rolling suitcase and a collapsible backdrop. I said I wasn't. He kept her in the lobby while he checked the guest list and video. Her name matched the one on the court papers as a character witness. They tried again, this time with a different angle. Tell the concierge you're delivering something big and hope someone holds a door. Building security wrote up a trespass notice for her and, per the manager, for my ex-friend and her husband. I didn't know residential buildings could do that until I watched security walk them to the sidewalk and explain what would happen if they stepped foot past the glass again. They didn't argue. They didn't look at me. I stood behind a planter and watched the automatic doors close. At work, she moved to a different floor. HR asked me to forward any further contact. She didn't email me. She did, however, leave a 1-star Google review for my building under a throwaway account about discrimination against families. Management's lawyers sent a takedown letter the following day. It disappeared by lunchtime. I only saw it because a neighbor forwarded the screenshot to our Strata group with "Is this the same woman from the lobby?" And 3 people chimed in with versions of yes. I decided I didn't need to be part of that conversation and muted the thread. The last thing that happened was small and, somehow, the thing that lodged in my throat. A handers-to-hand card arrived at my work in an unmarked envelope. Inside was a half apology in looping cursive: "I'm sorry things got so out of hand. I was under a lot of pressure and you know how important it is for me to make my child's event special." The final line read, "I wish you had been more flexible." There was a post-it stuck to the back with a Venmo handle and $275. I stared at it until I started laughing, the kind of laugh that comes out in hiccups and doesn't feel like humor. I put the card back in the envelope, wrote "return to sender" across the front, and dropped it in the office mail bin. On Saturday I hosted something for the first time in months. 4 friends, takeout cartons, a jigsaw puzzle on the coffee table. No glitter. No balloon arches. We buzzed people up and the only time I went to the lobby was to grab an extra bag of ice. I walked past the party room on my way back up and heard a piano lesson drifting through the door, the same halting scale my neighbor's kid has been fighting with since September. It sounded exactly like home should sound: mundane, repetitive, peaceful. I went upstairs and closed my door and sat in the quiet and thought, this is the line, and I am not moving it. Update 4. I thought I'd finally aged out of surprises. Then a mutual friend texted me a link with, "Is this you hosting?" It was an Eventbrite page with my first name as the organizer and a header photo pulled straight off my building's amenities brochure. Downtown Kids Play Social, free tickets, 2-hour slot, my party room in the background like a real estate ad. The description read like it had been translated twice: resident hosted fun, soft play safe, balloons welcomed. My stomach did that small sideways drop it does on elevators. I forwarded it to building management and hit the report button so hard I thought my trackpad might crack. By the time the property manager called me back, 3 parents had already phoned the concierge asking about parking. We got the link down within an hour, but the cached page stuck around long enough for people to keep trying. Saturday morning I looked out over the lobby from the mezzanine and watched strollers cluster, like a slow-moving school of fish. Concierge stood up from his desk and gently repeated private building until the phrase lost all meaning. One dad held up his phone at me like a badge, as if he could unlock doors. I went downstairs with the manager and gave a short statement, just the facts. She emailed me 10 minutes later with a forwarded receipt. The event had been created using a burner Gmail with my first and last name in it and a phone number ending in the same 4 digits as my ex-friend's husband. I sat very still and counted backward from 20, then sent the email to HR and the police non-emergency line and asked how to record this as harassment. It must have rattled her that I didn't engage directly, because the next escalation was cheap and immediate. A wellness check at 11:42 p.m. on a Tuesday. 2 officers at my door, polite and tired, saying they'd received a call about screaming and a child crying in my unit. I live alone. I showed them the open pizza box, the dry basil plant on my counter, and the email thread with the event link and the trespass notice. One of them squinted at the building name on the concierge letter and nodded. He took down the case number and said, very carefully, that false reports tie up resources and that if it happened again I should consider a protective order. They left with that cop walk that is half obligation and half apology. I sat on my rug and shook for a bit, then sent the case number to HR, my property manager, and the non-emergency contact again so there was a breadcrumb trail. The next morning I filled out the forms for a civil harassment restraining order. The clerk helped me staple things in the right places and told me where to sign sticky flags. They gave me a court date 2 weeks out and a pink copy of the temporary order to carry with me like a hall pass. I emailed a scan to building management and security. HR emailed back within the hour saying our company would enforce an on-site and to let them know if I needed an escort from the parking garage. Court the second time was the same humming fluorescent as small claims, but with a longer bench and a different flavor of impatience. She came with her husband and a legal pad. I had a folder that was starting to feel like a personality trait. The judge asked for instances of contact after I'd told her not to. I handed over the Eventbrite screenshots, the concierge log with the stroller crowd, the police incident number from the wellness check, the attempted delivery from the woman with the backdrop, and the card with the Venmo handle. I didn't editorialize. I just put the papers in a neat stack and waited. She tried to say she was under pressure, that she never meant harm, that it was miscommunication and community use. The judge's eyebrows went so flat they could have cut glass. Ma'am, she said, evenly, community use means consent. You do not have it. The husband started to speak over her about how vindictive I was and the judge held up her hand and asked him if he was a party to the case. He said he was her husband. She said, that's not what I asked, and told him to sit down. The order was granted for 12 months, no contact in person, no electronic contact, no third-party contact, and a specific clause about not using my name to book, access, or advertise any venue or amenity. The judge added the building's address to the stay-away list. It was clinical and terrifying and also a wave of relief so strong I felt a little dizzy. I left with a stamped order tucked against my ribs like a heat pack. HR took it seriously. Security deactivated her badge for my floor and flagged her name with the lobby guards. It added a filter that kicks her emails back to sender with a generic policy message. Someone from legal asked if I needed them to send a letter to her husband too. The judge had included him by name on the third-party provision, so the answer was technically already covered. I started parking on a different level for a while anyway, just to see if my shoulders could remember what down felt like. Meanwhile, the building committee actually turned out to be useful. We trialed a new visitor system that sends a QR code only when the host is physically at the front desk with ID. Vendors got their own category. There's a line in the resident guide now about impersonation being grounds for a permanent trespass ban. When the email went out, my inbox pinged with exactly one response, a piano teacher on my floor thanking me because parents had been trying to wait in the hall during lessons and now she could point to a rule. I walked past that room a few days later and heard Twinkle, Twinkle goading a metronome. Sometimes peace is just the lack of a chorus. One night, a neighbor knocked with a tin of biscotti. He's the one with the greyhound who hates the elevator bell. He said, "This is overdue," and handed me a folded note from the concierge tray addressed to resident. Inside was a brief apology from her mother-in-law. No ask, no Venmo handle, just a rueful line about being embarrassed in the lobby and choosing not to make it worse. I wrote thank you for the note on a post-it and left it with concierge with a mental prayer that it died there. 2 days later a link to a parenting Facebook group landed in my messages. A thread with my first name and the words "mean condo lady" sandwiched between stock photos of sprinkles. I clicked, read 4 sentences about gatekeeping community spaces, and closed the tab. I cannot be in every room someone uses my name in. The relief of that is so new it still makes me feel like I'm skipping class. The last peripheral note came from a vendor, again a new balloon company, this time with a quick, almost shy message. Thank you for confirming you're not a venue. We've added a policy to require proof of host residency. On Friday, I bought a second basil plant because the first one finally gave up. I watered both like I meant it. That night I used the party room for the first time since all of it, not for a party but for a residence board game night. 10 people, 2 folding tables, a guy from the 5th floor who takes Monopoly very seriously. I signed out the key with my ID, walked down with the manager, and at the end we wiped the tables and put the chairs back in the rack. Someone had brought a lemon loaf with way too much glaze. I ate a slice with my fingers and nobody spilled anything. On my way back upstairs, the concierge stopped me to hand over a laminated card with my name on it, the new host credential. He smiled and said, "It's nice to see you and here for you." I tapped it against my palm like a metronome and went home to a quiet that didn't hum with dread. I locked my door. I looked at the 2 basil plants as if they could answer. This is the line. I drew it. Is holds. Update 5. I thought the laminated host card and the pink order tucked in my purse would be the period at the end of the sentence. Then a cargo van with soft play company in bubble letters idled at our loading dock at 8:07 m. On a Thursday, asking for me by first and last name and party room access, per the host. Concierge rang my unit and I was still in slippers, coffee cooling next to an unread email about Q2O budgets. The driver held up a clipboard through the glass like a talisman. My name was spelled right. The invoice had our building's address, a 2-hour slot, and resident host to provide keys. I asked the manager to keep them there and forwarded the PDF to the police contact who had given me the case number for the wellness check. I attached the restraining order with a clause about not using my name to book, access, or advertise amenities. He called back within 5 minutes. We're sending an officer to take a report. Please don't go downstairs. Soft Play Company was polite. They had a stack of pastel phone blocks and a contract signed from a Gmail with my name plus 2 numbers that matched the husband's last 4. When the officers arrived, they took photos of the clipboard, the van, and the driver's text thread with the client. Then they asked the manager to print the trespass notices on file. 30 minutes later, 2 more officers walked into her building across town. I know because a detective called me at lunch to say she'd been served with a notice to appear for a restraining order violation, and the officers had explained, twice, what contact by proxy looks like. I stared at the soft play safe bullet on the invoice until the font blurred, and said thank you like I was ordering a sandwich. The hearing was 3 weeks later in the same courthouse that hums. Different courtroom, same tired clock. She wore a blazer that didn't quite fit at the shoulders and sat 2 chairs away from her husband. I kept my folder closed on my lap and waited until the clerk called our names. The judge flipped through the order, the Eventbrite screenshots, the concierge log, the police report with the van photo, and said, with a kind of even tone that stands up by itself, "You were told not to use her name. You used her name." She tried to talk about only trying to make a child's day work. The judge didn't look up from the paper. That is not relevant to compliance. The order was extended to 3 years. The judge added 10 hours of a class called Boundaries and Consequences and a warning about arrest if there was a next time. The husband shifted like his chair was a question. When they stood to leave, she did that thing with her mouth like she'd swallowed a word wrong. I kept my eyes on the grain of the table until my stomach remembered which way gravity goes. Work went quiet in the way offices do when the gossip finally burns itself out. Her desk was empty by Friday. HR sent a sentence about voluntary separation and badge deactivation. I didn't ask for details. I parked on my usual level again and my shoulders didn't climb to my earlobes. The building committee's new QR system went live. The first weekend, a dad showed up at the front desk with a bakery box and a confident smile, and the manager smiled back and pointed at the scanner. Host only. He looked briefly like he'd lost a page. Then he texted someone and 3 minutes later a resident in flip-flops trotted down, scanned, and it was a non-event, which felt like the gold standard. The property manager slid a folded post-it toward me at our next meeting with a scribble, "This is working." There was a little dot of lemon loaf grease on the corner. On a gray Tuesday, the mailroom held a registered letter addressed in block print. I signed and opened it under the lobby lighting because I didn't want to bring anything home that didn't belong. Inside was a cashier's check for $275 and a short note on lined paper in the tidy hand of someone who learned cursive when teachers still rapped knuckles. "Please accept this to close the matter of the vendors. I am sorry for our part in this. M." The return address was her in-law's building. There was no ask. No handle. I walked it upstairs, sat at my table, and wrote a thank you on plain paper that said, "Received. I will donate it." I made it out to the community center's weekend program that buys art supplies and pays the piano teacher extra when parents cancel last minute. The receipt came back with a lime green stamp that made the number look less heavy. I tucked it in the same folder as the rest, not because I needed one more scrap of anything, but because I like complete sets. The last blip wasn't hers, not directly. It was a call from a city investigator from the Office of Civil Rights who had a complaint on file about discrimination against families by a high-rise amenity policy downtown. He asked to confirm whether our party room was public. I said it was private, resident only, sign out with ID, refundable deposit, now with a QR code that requires the resident be physically present. He said, "That's what the paperwork says too," and closed the case. His voice had the tired courteousness of someone who reads the same bad paragraph all day. At the end he said, soft, "I'm sorry this has been as much as it has." I said, "Me too," and meant it in the way you mean a weather report. On Saturday I used the party room for a different kind of kid thing. Not a party. A handful of residents' children sat in a semicircle with their shoes off and their hair sticking up, holding construction paper crowns we'd caught on the folding table that still has a ding from someone's overenthusiastic Jenga move. The piano teacher let them plunk the keys at the end one by one if they raised a hand. The Greyhound's owner leaned in the doorway and the elevator bell dinged and the dog didn't flinch. When we finished, we wiped down the table with a lemony cloth and folded the chairs and somebody's crown fell behind the plant and the child crawled under the leaves to rescue it like it was a mission. The manager left. He said, "This is the kind of chaos the deposit survives." I scanned out with my little badge and it made that soft affirmation beep that feels like a tiny bow. On my way upstairs, a man I didn't know held the door to the stairwell and said, "You're the one that did the policies, right?" I said, "One of them." He said, "Thank you," and didn't make it a story. It felt better than any courtroom sentence I've heard this year. I went home to two basil plants deciding in opposite directions about life, stood them next to the window like I was choosing sides, and made a grocery list that had nothing dramatic on it. Pasta. Olive oil. Lemons. I put the host card on the counter and tapped it once like a metronome for habit's sake, then slid it into the drawer with the takeout menus and the scissors that never are where I think they are. The door shut the way a door should shut, regular and unremarkable. The line is still there. Not a wall, not a moat. Just a line. I keep stepping back from it and it keeps holding.